Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and for this video I'm going to be going through the best segments from horror anthologies. I'm going to be going through a few movies and picking out the best segments and putting them in a list of what I think would make up the ultimate horror anthology. A greatest hits, if you will, of all these segments. I'm going to give my 10 favourite, and the only criteria is I can only pick one from each movie. So here's what I think the ultimate horror anthology would look like. Let's get straight to it. Okay, so I'm going in chronological order. So we're starting in 1945 with Dead of Night. A film that's probably most famous for the ventriloquist dummy segment, which is a fantastic story. But I'm going to go with a different one. I'm going to go for the golfers, the one on the golf course. This is these two golfing rivals and they're in love with the same woman. And they say whoever wins this golfing match can marry her. So they have this golfing match. One of the guys wins by cheating. And the other guy is so devastated by this, he actually kills himself. He drowns himself in the lake on the golf course. So the other guy who wins, he goes on to marry this woman, and then after a while starts playing golf again. But his golfing rival starts to haunt him on the golf course from beyond the grave. And only he can see or hear the ghost of his golfing rival. And it's actually quite funny, this one is. It's more of a light-hearted segment. Probably more in the vein of an Ealing comedy than a horror anthology. But it makes for some really witty and entertaining scenes, especially when the guy goes to the bar on the golf course and starts arguing with his ghost friend and no one else can see or hear him, so the bartender thinks that he's going crazy. It did actually make me laugh, that one did, which was rare for kind of 1940s. I'm not into comedy that's that old. But yeah, The Golfers, nice way to start this. It's more of a light-hearted one. It's got a lot of charm to it. And I do like the story of the guy coming back from beyond the grave to torment the guy who cheated him out of this golf match and marrying the woman that he loved. So first segment on this one is The Golfers from Dead of Night. Next up, from 1965, we have The Creeping Vine from Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. One of the stories that's told on board the train by Peter Cushing. And this one, it's a pretty simple one. It's just a creeping vine plant that makes its way into this house and starts to attack the owners and cause them all sorts of trouble. It's a segment that I think a lot of people are going to kind of scoff at now. It's not particularly scary, and the creeping vine is pretty unconvincing and non-threatening in this day and age. I think it was like all piping and things that they did up in all this green makeup to make it look like a moving plant. But it's just one that I've always enjoyed, and you don't see many plant-based horror films out there. There should be more. So I've always enjoyed The Creeping Vine, and I do like to see the shots of it creeping in through the window and things like that. It's just a segment I've always enjoyed, and a good example of the early British anthology segment. So second one on this list is Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, The Creeping Vine. Okay, the third segment on here is, for me, one of my very favourite of any segment of an anthology film. From 1971's The House That Dripped Blood, it's The Cloak, which sees John Pertwee as a very kind of cynical, miserable horror star that's making a movie and spends most of his time complaining about the state of modern horror and how they're not as good as the old Universal classics. It's quite self-referential. They even have a dig at Christopher Lee, who's in the film, so I assume he was okay with that. And John Pertwee is making this movie, and he's playing a vampire, so he goes out to try and find a cloak to wear as a vampire, and finds one, but it has a dark power about it, and there may be some people in the movie that are a bit too real, shall we say, when playing the vampires. And yeah, it's just a fantastic one. John Pertwee is wonderful as this miserable horror actor. He does a fantastic job. And Ingrid Pitt is in this as the vampire, and I love her performance in this. I know she's played vampires in other movies, but there's something about her in this one. She has a sleek elegance, I feel, when playing the vampire character in this segment. So yeah, one I've absolutely always loved since first seeing it from The House That Dripped Blood. It's The Cloak. Next up, segment number 4 from one of my favourite anthologies, 1972, Asylum, and the segment is Frozen Fear, which is the one with the guy, he murders his wife. I think he's having an affair. He murders his wife and chops up her various body parts with a hatchet, wraps them all in kind of brown parcel paper and puts them in the freezer. But they all come back to life, and we get the amazing shots of her arms and bits of her torso moving around in the parcel paper. And then we eventually get the fantastic scene, which was used on the poster of this movie, with the papered up severed head at the top of the stairs, and you can see that it's breathing through the nose. And watching that as a kid, I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It's always stuck with me ever since, and it's a great segment from, as I say, one of my favourite anthologies. So for segment number 4, we have Frozen Fear from Asylum. Alright, segment number 5, and I said how The Cloak was possibly my favourite segment from any anthology. This one would also contend for that honour. Segment number 5 is from 1972's Tales from the Crypt, and it's Valentine's Day. The infamous one with Peter Cushing playing Mr. Grimsdyke, who is like this kindly old widower. He lives on this street and he just kind of does his own thing. He enjoys seeing like the local children and things like that. And there are 2 sort of upper class, quite uppity people living across the way who want his house and I think the land. And Mr. Grimsdyke, Peter Cushing, doesn't want to give it up. He's lived there all his life. And he's like, no thank you, I'm not going anywhere. So they, just out of their own sort of, horrible malice, they devise this prank on Valentine's Day where they make out that all the residents have sent him Valentine's cards, but when he opens them, they have really horrible, nasty and downright threatening messages. And upon reading this, the kindly Mr. Grimsdyke unfortunately takes his own life. So these upper class people that have done this, they do eventually get the house and everything that they wanted. However, a year later on Valentine's Day, Peter Cushing's character returns to take his vengeance in what is one of the greatest scenes you'll ever see in a horror film. The scene of the zombified Mr. Grimsdyke rising up from the grave is just like one of the greatest scenes that I've seen. From the spooky, foggy looking graveyard to the way he rises out of the grave, and then the amazing zombie makeup. Peter Cushing's kind of gaunt face really lent itself well to that decaying zombified look, and it's just amazing. It's a fantastic segment. It's kind of sad, but does have a pretty cool ending. But it's one that's always stayed with me over the years. So yeah, segment number 5 from Tales from the Crypt, it's Valentine's Day. Okay, sticking with the same DVD, because for segment number 6 we go to the Vault of Horror from 1973 with the segment called The Neat Job. And this is a really fun one. This is Terry Thomas, who's always wonderful to watch in these kind of movies. And he gets this kind of new young wife, bit of a trophy wife, who moves in with him, and Terry Thomas's character is just an obsessive clean freak. Everything has to be spotlessly clean and everything has to be organised in its own place, and he is obsessive with it. And his young new wife, bless her, she tries her best. She tries to tend around the house and keep the house nice and tidy and clean things, but everything she does is wrong. Every everything she cleans is done wrong. Everywhere she put things is wrong. And Terry Thomas is on her relentlessly. And it's a segment where he just gets more and more frustrated and she gets more and more frustrated until it reaches its grisly climax. And you can see what's coming. It's quite predictable, but the joy of this one is kind of seeing it just boil up and boil over. And yeah, it's just... it's always one that I found rather entertaining, and I've got to say Terry Thomas is really quite funny as this just crazy clean freak. And yeah, you'll watch this one on tenterhooks a little bit, but yeah, it does have a bit of comic relief to go with it. So segment number 6, one that I've always enjoyed, is The Neat Job from Vault of Horror. Okay, next up we move into the 1980s with 1983's Twilight Zone the movie and the segment It's a Good Life. This was the one directed by Joe Dante and takes on one of my favourite Twilight Zone stories. The story of the kid who he's like telepathic and he can read minds, and he only wants people to think nice, happy, positive thoughts. So everyone around him is just like happy thoughts, happy thoughts, happy thoughts, happy thoughts, which just the thought of that itself is quite exhausting and terrifying. And this woman from out of town, I think she hits his bike or something, so she has to take him home. And she gets back and she meets the family, who are all just overbearingly positive. And she doesn't know why. But if they're not positive, if they think anything else other than happy thoughts, this kid punishes them in like a imaginative, childlike way, which is really just an excuse to showcase a bunch of really creative and crazy 80s effects. So like that creature that jumps out on Kevin McCarthy and things like that. And this household setting just has such a creepy, uneasy feeling because they're in this weird situation, and obviously the woman doesn't know what's going on, and it's such an unnerving, strange family to be around, and a really creepy kid as well. Very effective segment. I like all of the ones in Twilight Zone the movie, but I think this one, particularly the notion of this one of always having to think happy thoughts, has always stayed with me. So yeah, so for segment number 7 we have It's a Good Life from Twilight Zone the movie. For segment number 8 we had one that I had to put on this list, from 1987's Creepshow 2, The Raft, which is a pretty simple segment. A bunch of these teenagers swim out to a raft in the middle of the lake and are stalked and terrorised by this oil slick like creature in the water, who, if it gets to them, it like gets on their skin and like melts them down, a bit like the Blob. So we get some really cool gooey 80s makeup and special effects. And yeah, really not much else to this one. I like kind of the tense nature of this because they're stuck on the raft. I like the look of the creature itself, although it is just kind of an oil slick. I always like seeing it as a kid and wondering how they did it. And as I say, the effects in it are fantastic. So yeah, not a lot to say about the raft. It's just a really simple yet effective and awesome 80s segment. So yeah, for segment number 8 from Creepshow 2, The Raft. Okay, moving into the 90s now with 1993's Body Bags, and the segment is The Eye. Now I picked this one because I've had a lot of sort of classy British segments on this list. I wanted to include something that was, and no disrespect to Body Bags, a little bit more lowbrow, because that's not a bad thing in my world. I've always liked The Eye from Body Bags. Saw this one when I was quite young and it's always stuck with me. And The Eye tells the story of a pro baseball player, played by Mark Hamill, who he has an accident which sort of damages his eyes. His vision is kind of shot. And so obviously that affects his game, he can't play. So he has this like pioneering eye transplant surgery. And it all seems to go well. But after the surgery, he starts to see these weird kind of dark visions of dead people and violent acts. And it starts to change him as a person too. And it turns out like the eyes that he's got now belong to like some serial killer or something. So he's seeing these dark visions from the mind of the serial killer. And it's got some really really dark moments in it. Like I said, I first saw this as a kid, and like the bit when he's sort of shoveling in the garden and he finds the dead body, like his shovel gets to feet. That really kind of made an impact on me when I was young. I thought it was really creepy. And this was the first thing I'd ever seen Mark Hamill do outside of Star Wars. And as a young age, to see Luke Skywalker in this really dark situation was really something, and it bothered me in a way that I didn't quite know why. It's like, this is this wholesome hero guy, and he's in this weird dark segment where he's killing people and being all violent, and that's always stayed with me over the years, and I've always remembered certain scenes and Mark Hamill acting crazy. He does a great job in this segment. There's a few good ones in body bags, but yeah, this is the one that stuck with me all those years. So segment number 9 from Body Bags, it's The Eye. And for segment number 10, the last one on this list, I wanted to go for something from the VHS franchise. It's one of my favourite franchises in horror. Other than the last film, I think all the films are really good, and pretty much all the segments are excellent and usually quite terrifying. But the one I'm going to go for is Safe Haven from VHS 2 from 2013. This one sees this documentary film crew, and they get invited to this mysterious Indonesian cult within this sort of big facility, and they go there to kind of document who they are and maybe see a few bizarre practices and things like that. But it just gets a lot more dark and violent than expected, and all hell breaks loose and people are getting killed everywhere, and it turns out they're at the centre of this strange ritual where there's someone in this demon. But it goes from kind of slow burn, you can feel something's not quite right, to just insane death and chaos everywhere, all through the lens of this found footage. And yeah, it's just one that I think it's one of the best ones that the VHS franchise have done. And thought this would be a good one because you kind of start with kind of the stiff upper lip classy British anthologies and end with the more kind of intense modern found footage anthologies of things like VHS. So yeah, segment number 10 is Safe Haven from VHS 2. So there you go, guys. That's my list, my greatest hits, if you will, of horror anthology segments. 10 of my favourite ones right there. Let me know what you think of my picks. Let me know if you agree. If you don't, feel free to let me know what your 10 best segments would be in the comments below. I'd be really interested to know which ones you guys liked. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.